Thank you, everyone. It really means a lot to me that at the last session of the last day, we've got so many faces in the room. We are going to be talking about marketing your platforms. You might have wondered why we are going to have a marketing conversation in the Cloud Foundry for operators. But this will be a nice way to kind of wind up the event, shift into the other side of the brain, and benefit from some of the patterns that we've seen at Pivotal with our customers who are more successful at driving adoption amongst their developer populations and therefore getting all the benefits of running a Cloud Foundry-based platform. So my name is Dormain Drewitz. I work for Pivotal on the product marketing team, and happy to talk to you about why it's no field of dreams, which I realize is a baseball reference in Europe. We'll get to that. So what we're going to go through today, we're going to talk a little bit about why. And it's always important, if I'm here to kind of convince you that maybe there's some things you want to do differently, you probably need to understand why you would want to do them differently first. Then we'll get into a bit of the what. And there's a couple of things that we've noticed that are a recipe for success. First, from a mindset perspective, and then we'll actually get into some of the skill sets and tool sets around the practice of product marketing. And then we'll conclude with some very prescriptive next steps, because I work for Pivotal. We have a lot of opinions, so we like to be very prescriptive about things. So to understand why does marketing your platform matter, particularly for the team that is operating the platform and engineering all the automation around the platform? So there's this movie, it's like 30 years old now. Folks remember Field of Dreams? Kevin Costner? Okay. So it's a classic baseball movie, and I realize this is not really the territory for baseball. But this guy basically builds a baseball field because he has voices telling him that if he builds it, these players will show up, including his father or grandfather or something like that, who he wants to have a relationship with. It's a really weird plot line, frankly. You probably shouldn't go spend your life savings building sports facilities for ghosts. But this idea of if you build it, they will come, where sure, somehow magically we're going to build something and people are going to show up. Well, it's Hollywood stuff. It doesn't really work that way. You may invest a bunch of time building a platform that either you think is what your developers need, or you even have feedback is what your developers need. But that doesn't mean that they're just going to all show up. So let's talk a little bit about what good looks like versus sometimes some of the things we hear. Now, we'll do a little bit of naming on the good side, but we won't do the shaming on the not so good side. Does this work? Oh, I love it when that laser pointer works. So over here, this is some examples from T-Mobile, and they're now actually closer to 40,000 application instances running on their Cloud Foundry platform. So this is a couple years old. But the things that they identified when they were speaking even a couple years ago, what you'll notice is they made a lot of deliberate and conscious effort into how they attracted and onboarded developers onto their platform. They didn't leave it up to chance. And so I think that, and you can see from the adoption curve that they were able to enjoy in those early years, you can see that those kinds of efforts paid off. So there's a number of other customers I can think of that have sort of done similar things, where they've made conscious efforts to enable their developers, to communicate regularly with their developers, and to really bring the developers into what the platform was going to offer them on their terms. Now, in contrast, sometimes I hear things that are sort of indications that some of the lines are not connecting between what the platform team is trying to do and the people they're trying to do it for. So, sometimes you get this sort of top-down mandate where it's like, okay, we're supposed to have apps on the platform, but we don't know which ones, right? So there's indicative that there's a disconnect from who those customers are going to be. They haven't found their first customers. I kind of live a little bit in the Silicon Valley bubble. I'm born and raised in the Bay Area. So I'm surrounded by all these people who want to have startups and the fame and glory of that. So I hear those kinds of patterns all the time in the entrepreneurial world, where folks, they've got to find and land those very first customers, and they're almost building a bespoke service for them. The man behind the curtain kind of approach, where they're just trying to make sure that they're solving the problem. They'll figure out how to automate it from there. That type of thing means that they really know who those first customers are. So another thing I've heard is, okay, so we set up the platform, and we've exposed it to all the developers. We've got like 15% of them that are doing fine. They seem to understand what these cloud native patterns are. They're off to the races. 85% of them are pushing junk to the platform. The platform can keep it up. Bosch is constantly resuscitating their application, but behind the scenes, it's chewing up a bunch of resources because it's constantly having to restart this stuff. We wish that they kind of understood the basic principles better. It's like, well, they're not born understanding 12-factor. They're not born understanding what a continuous integration pipeline should look like. Maybe you should teach that to them. Maybe you should enable them. Or things that, sometimes I hear folks are listening to other users. I moderate a user group for Pivotal platform users. And sometimes some of them are sharing all these things that they're doing with the developers, and someone asks the question, it's like, what's the one thing that's the most scalable and effective thing that you're doing? Right? They're basically trying to find the silver bullet, which is totally understandable, but it means that they're missing kind of the realities of what it takes to attract developers to your offering. How many folks here saw Cote's talk yesterday about platform as product? Okay. So this really dovetails, what I'm going to talk about really dovetails with that notion. The platform as product kind of concept encompasses a lot about how you're building for your developers, but if you have a product, you got to start thinking about product marketing. So that tends to fall on the product owner or the product manager of the platform product. So let's talk a little bit about some of the recipe for success patterns that we've noticed, and some of this I'm just also deriving from what I do on a day-to-day basis and as a product marketer for Pivotal, and I've been product marketer at other companies before. So you're getting 8 or so years of experience baked in here. I'm going to make another baseball reference because I don't think I really landed the I'm an American in Europe quite strongly enough. So we're just going to keep going with it until everyone fully understands. So there's this notion in baseball of your at-bats, right? Every time you step up to the plate, the pitcher throws the ball at you, and you have your chance to have a hit. If you read or saw Moneyball, you might have noticed that baseball is actually a very metrics oriented sport. And the at-bats refers to, okay, your batting average is how many times you've hit divided by the number of times you've been at bat. So one thing that sometimes you see people trying to do is they're trying to hit a home run the first time they've stepped up to the plate. So they're trying to absolutely just kill it without being prepared to fail, right? And in baseball, you fail all the time, right? There's a lot of reasons why you don't get a hit. It doesn't mean that you're a bad player. So really good batting averages might be, .30 something. Means that 7 out of 10 times you're actually not getting a hit. That's actually really good. So this notion of what you want is you want more at-bats with your customers so that you have more opportunities to learn and iterate. It's very similar to how you might approach building the products in terms of you want those feedback cycles. The same thing applies to your communication strategy with your developers and the way that you might run programs and events to educate those developers. You're not going to nail it on the first try, and that's okay. So embracing that mindset is more powerful than trying to pre-optimize for a home run the first time. So, gathering, feedback and requests, and just be prepared to constantly do that. That goes hand in hand with this other concept that I've run into where if you're not a marketer, there's a few terms that you maybe have picked up. You've probably heard of a press release, and you've probably heard the word a launch, right? And everyone kind of, when you think of launch, a lot of people's mind go to, Steve Jobs in his black turtleneck in a, dark screen background, and then he's got his beautiful iPhone device or something that he's launching, and he literally changes the world in that moment. And so this is your kind of the outsider's perception of a launch. So reality is, even at a textbook level, folks in the practice have written, there's maybe 6 different kinds of launches. It depends on what you're releasing and what you're changing and what the opportunity is. And the other thing is that it's not a one and done experience. It's constantly going back in front of those users and launching again, launching differently, and sort of opening up those channels of steady communication. Because as you're changing your platform, you need to have those channels available to you to communicate that to your developers so that they're aware of these are the latest features that you should be taking advantage of. Here's how we've helped you succeed. Here's how we've listened to you, we've heard you, and we've solved your problems. So embracing this notion of you're going to be doing this regularly. A European customer actually, earlier this year, I was moderating one of these user calls, and he was the product manager, and he said, I spend 50% of my time marketing. And it was a bit of a revelation for him, but he'd embraced it. Now, not everyone else on the call was really prepared for it, but it reflected that, yeah, this is a big part of my job. So I've got to do it. Come on in. We haven't really gotten into anything interesting yet. You have missed all the baseball references, though. Okay, so another thing, and anyone who's worked closely with me doing any kind of marketing activities or launches knows that I love me some numbers. So I'm a metrics girl, and really a lot of marketing is a numbers game. And so you want to be prepared to use numbers as part of your feedback, because while getting feedback and taking a survey and tell me what how you found out about this, tell me what you want, tell me how you like to be communicated to. That's all fair and good. But a lot of people, their behavior speaks more clearly than what they're willing to articulate to you. So if you have an internal wiki site, this actually just came up earlier this week, instrument that wiki site so that you're gathering metrics and you know what pages are people looking at most frequently. That's where your eyeballs are, right? And you want to use that information. So there's a number of things you want to measure, which might be also part of just your product practice of how many developers do we have, how many applications do we have, and how are things doing in terms of, are the applications being updated regularly? Like if that's one of our goals is to have a platform that allows our developers to change frequently, are we measuring that? Now, you might be saying, well, we were doing all that anyways. What does that have to do with marketing? Those are powerful numbers when you're trying to recruit your next application team, your next 100 developers that you're bringing on the platform. So make sure you're measuring them so that you have proof, you have evidence that it's like, we've helped these 100 teams. Now we want to get the next 1,000 applications on the platform. It's going to be a lot easier if we have proof and we have evidence. So that's the value that some of those metrics can provide you. Another one that I came across recently is that a team out in California is using, is they started using a Net Promoter Score. And part of this was actually about the platform team shifting their mindset to really grok that the developers weren't just like happy with whatever they were putting out there. And that this was really, about embracing that product mindset. And this is their product that they're building, and these are their customers. So you probably notice Net Promoter Score sort of surveys in lots of places. They're used by marketing departments. It's usually a marketing intelligence function where we want to understand how likely are you to recommend this to your friends and family, right? How likely are you to recommend this platform to another developer in your office? So that feedback can tell you a lot of things, both in terms of just how you're going to manage the product, but you have to realize that's a marketing function that is just used by product teams. So that kind of thing I think is really interesting to see organically bubbling up amongst different platform teams around the world. And then of course, can you tie it to the dollars? Now this is useful because sometimes you're not just marketing your platform to developers. Sure, those are your users, those are the ones you're trying to attract their application workload onto the platform. But you also have to market the platform to the business leaders and the decision makers, whether they're in the lines of business that own the application or they're in infrastructure team that might be just your own superiors in your chain of command. You need to be able to market to them that this platform is successful. So can you tie the platform to dollars somewhere, or euros, or pound sterling, or whatever currency you want to? But the point is, how are you measuring the business value? Can you demonstrate where this is reducing costs? Can you demonstrate where this is opening up growth and new revenue streams? All of that is valuable information, not just so that you know it, but so that you can go and attract those developers, and you can attract new lines of business within a large organization. I'm sure a lot of folks here are in large companies that have multiple operating divisions. Maybe one group is using Cloud Foundry, but there's 6 other operating divisions that aren't. How are you going to win them over? At a senior executive level, you need a strong business case. Okay, so the last sort of philosophical thing before I get into more tactical approaches is the idea of doing some things that don't scale as well as things that scale. When you think of marketing, you often think of a sort of one-to-many channel or style of communicating, as opposed to a sales organization might be, hey, I'm one customer to one person, and we have a very one-to-one relationship. The marketing organization doesn't own that particular relationship. They've got a broadcast. It's all about broadcasting. So it seems like it's all about scale. And don't get me wrong, that's important. But when you're learning about what works, it's sometimes helpful to do some things that don't scale. Recognize that that's what you're doing, so that you don't get yourself caught in, wow, everything we're doing doesn't scale. An example I like to point to is Airbnb. This was written up actually several years ago about in the early days of Airbnb. They ran into this interesting challenge where they were trying to they had to attract hosts before they could attract guests, but ultimately they wanted transactions. And what they were finding is people weren't really booking a lot of stays. So they went out to New York, they got a professional photographer camera, and they went like door to door to the people who had listings, and they helped them take nicer pictures, because people were putting kind of crappy pictures up of their New York apartments, and lo and behold, people were not booking them. They did that, and they directly attribute, like by solving it in New York, they set off a chain reaction in all these other markets where people started to figure out, oh, this is helping to get bookings. We need better pictures. We just need glossier materials so that this looks good to the people we're trying to market to. And so to get it started, they had to do something that ultimately was never going to scale. They were never going to have to go to every single host and take their pictures for them. But starting off, testing it, seeing what the response was, not only helped solve that issue, but it set off kind of a positive change across their network. And then you balance this with the things that do scale, right? So when you run an event where you can get 20 or 100 people in the room to educate them all at the same time? Can you send out a newsletter that can go to thousands of internal developers and help raise their awareness of the platform and new features? Branding, right, is a very scalable thing. You create one logo identity for your platform, and it gets reinforced every time you use it. So you want to do both. Is really the answer. Be conscious about where you're taking something on that's like, this isn't going to scale, but let's try it and see what we can learn and see if we can then figure out how to make this scale later. Okay, so let's get into some tactics. And we're going to actually go through these tactics from the least scalable to the most scalable. We're going to start with office hours. Office hours are definitely something that, as a product manager, you're getting a lot of great feedback about the product itself. But you can also test messaging in these groups. You can start to understand when we talk about the product like this, how do they respond? Can we understand and get better articulation of their pain points? Because that's going to feed into the messaging that we will use with the masses. So you can approach these office hours not just as I'm getting specific feature feedback, but how is this whole story communicated on a one-on-one basis? So then kind of inching up a little bit. Now we get to workshops, right? We go from just working with one team at a time. Now we can bring several teams in. Education and enablement is, especially when you're dealing with a complex product that requires change on the part of the user, you need to be prepared to include a lot of enablement in your marketing efforts. And so running workshops regularly and realizing like this is not one and done. So this is something you're going to probably be doing regularly, and it will probably have to evolve, but how can you do it in a way that's relatively rinse and repeat and repeatable? Okay, then newsletters. So this is something that folks use all the time in the marketing context because it's establishing a regular cadence with your audience that you can funnel information into. Now, there's some things that, some common mistakes people make with newsletters. And I've seen when customers have tried to do this on their own, what you find is it's like there's 20 or 30 things in the newsletter. No one's reading all those newsletters, right? We do this in marketing all the time where we're constantly testing, we're A/B testing different material and seeing like what gets people to click on things more. Again, comes back to all those metrics and numbers. Those are your friend. But what we find are things like when you've got more like 6 to 8 things in the newsletter, people are going to click on more. So you really want to hone down, if you're going to run a newsletter internally to update your developers, you want to make sure you're prioritizing, right? You can't just give them everything. You're going to have that temptation, resist that urge, take some really deep breaths, and then delete stuff out of that draft. And just don't be afraid. It's going to work out okay. So you have to make those decisions. You also have to remember who your audience is. And so are you putting things in there that are interesting to you? Are you putting things in there that are interesting to your readers? Those are not always the same thing. So one thing we've actually started to do recently at Pivotal is I now curate like an 80% done developer newsletter that the teams at our accounts can finalize. They can redo the whole thing if they really want to, but at least I've given them something that's 80% done because a lot of enterprise developers have some common things, so I'll put them in the monthly newsletter and then let them finish it from there. Let's see, did I cover everything? Yeah, keep it short, keep it relevant. Focus on those upskilling things, right? Coming back to that, 15% of our developers are doing great, but 85% are pushing junk, right? It's like, remember, this is your opportunity to fix the junk, right? What are the common mistakes that you're seeing that they're making? And use this as like, hey, we found this great article about how to not do junk. And then include that. And then you also include all the things that are very specific to the product you're building. Include those success stories. Include those metrics. Get people excited about the platform that they're running on. And of course, include like, hey, new feature, right? Take advantage of this. Or, hey, important thing you should do so that you don't, have your applications disrupted because we have to make a change. And then, as I mentioned before, branding is an extremely scalable thing. It's also something that can be very difficult to change. As people know, like when a tech company changes their logo, the Twitter sphere is like all about the opinions. And so I don't envy anyone who has to go through that process. Also, product naming really sucks. But you have to name it, and you do want to put an identity on it, and it will feed into greater awareness of this thing as a thing, right? As opposed to just the way we've always done it, but now they're asking me to do something different. It's like, no, this is new. This is a new way of working, and it's got a name. The other thing I've seen is sometimes even the team that's working on it, they kind of have an associated identity. This is not unlike, for example, at Pivotal, you'll often hear the people working at Pivotal referred to as pivots, right? So a pivot is a thing, Pivotal, and then the Pivotal platform. These are all different things that are related, et cetera. So those are important things to think about. We've kind of moved through a bunch of useful tactics. Quick time check. All right. Product marketing, just a couple basics. When you are marketing a product, there's three main areas, three main questions that I like to make sure are answered. And then if I'm jumping in and helping out with a new product, I'll often do a mapping against these three questions for all the assets, the collateral, the pages, the internal assets, web, public-facing things, white papers, presentations, webinars, whatever. I'm going to map it against these three questions to make sure, are we answering these all the way across? The first thing is the why. To understand the why, the most important thing you need to focus on is the pain. Where are your users that you're trying to attract, where are they hurting, right? What hurts them the most? Because ultimately, fixing that pain is the why. That is why they're coming to you. Now, there may also be something that is, here's some, self-actualization level that you can also achieve, right, using Maslow's hierarchy, that might also be not a pain point, but we can help you with. But largely, the quickest sort of path to adoption is identify what is the pain that they're feeling, right? Is it taking too long to get access to various services? Is it taking too long to push to production? Is it taking too long? You get the idea. So make sure that you identify that pain, use those office hours to tease out what are your biggest pain points right now, and the words, as much as possible, listen very carefully to the words that those users are using. Those words are your friend. They can always say it better than you probably can. So the next thing is answering the what. What is the thing, right? We've built this platform. You want to be able to answer succinctly, what is this thing, okay? Maybe you've even given it a name. Remember, as you're answering the what it is, connect it back to the pain. Right? This is a way of solving this pain. And then finally, you get into the how, right? And especially folks who are more technical, they often love to jump into the how first. But they haven't always answered the why do I want to do this differently? And what is this thing you want me to push my application to? So the how sometimes feels like the easy thing when you're talking about a group of platform engineers, but I'm just going to add a little bit of something maybe that you haven't thought of, and that is basically how dopamine works for developers, which is if they don't have that hello world, you're asking them to do something new, they haven't gotten that first hello world dopamine hit in about 2 hours, they're probably going to start to back away. And it's going to be really hard to get them to invest that next level of trying something new and learning and changing their own behavior. So as you approach building out your how resources, think about getting that 2-hour-ish, give or take, Hello World experience. So that's the first taste that someone can get. It's probably with an app that's just a sample app, right? You're not going to ask them day one, take that thing that you're working on that's like really important to the business and let's just go try and push it on the platform, right? Get them that basic CF push experience in 2 hours. You can use it with a sample app. Once they kind of get that, a little bit of that wind in the hair, then it's like, okay, this is interesting. Now you give them a little bit more, you show them how to do a couple more changes. The 2-day dopamine hit. Then you can get to the 2-week dopamine hit, which is going to require them to do a lot more work. So thinking about things of 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, it's easier to remember. Okay, my detailed prescriptive next steps. I'm not going to go through all these, but I've tried to think through all of this stuff. Now, you might be doing a lot of this. You probably are kind of gathering some metrics here and there. You've probably got some things in place for how you communicate with developers. So you're not starting from zero. I recognize that. But I've published my slides to the the Cloud Foundry Summit site. This might be just a useful way for wherever you're starting. Think about, okay, in the next 10 days, let's get that first office hours going, right? We're not going to publish our first newsletter and solve some of the bigger, harder things. But let's get the quick kind of feedback session and start to capture. Maybe do a quick inventory of what you do have, et cetera. And then what can you do in 30 days? What can you do in 90 days? And with this quick program, you'll lose 20 pounds and grow taller and have more developers on your platform. I guarantee it. I'm just kidding. But I think you'll be able to get feedback that you can incorporate into how you're communicating with your developers that should help solve how are we regularly attracting new developers to the platform. Okay, got a number of resources. I've started to publish publicly about this. For years, I never would have assumed that what I actually do for my livelihood directly mattered so much to the people that I'm usually working with. But I've learned that that's actually not true. So now I'm starting to sort of share my secrets as a product marketer. And just some other good stuff that's out there that sort of speaks to how to kind of wrap your head around this. The big thing I would ask is that you kind of make room in your mindset that this is part of your job. It's not a one and done. You're going to do it all the time. It's actually can be really fun. And it's, I think, most fun when you measure it, because then you see progress. And I'll just leave you with, if you, in a month, can make it out to Austin, Texas. I know it's a bit of a haul from here. I'd love to see you. I've got a $200 discount code off Spring One platform for you to join us. That's it. Thank you.